Welcome back, gamers, to another Minecraft video. Alright, for real. We're going to be making a video about building a city really fast. What do you do? Well, first you start with World Painter. I'm going to show you. I made a 2000 by 2000 square map. That's what it is. I accidentally made it in a lower version, which means it's going to have problem using the newer blocks. I started out a little bit rocky. I didn't quite I started by making the general outline of the island I wanted made, and then I left a bunch of land at the top that I could build structures and then I could copy over. In this build, I make use of a lot of structure blocks. And if you don't know how to use structure blocks, you can watch someone else's video about that. They're pretty simple. I start making some foothills. I don't want to make too many foothills on the inside of that arch shape because that's where I want the city to be. I'm going to be filling up that whole arch. Right there, I'm smoothing out so that it kind of seems more natural. It's not just a flat area. The water level and the sand level is kind of tricky. I'm not super experienced using this, which means you don't have to be either to get a good result. But I am focusing specifically on speed. There's always a balance between speed and detail. And right now, I'm focusing a lot more on the speed and sacrificing some of the detail. Making rivers is kind of a weird thing. A lot of people have different ways of doing it. The way I have chosen is by making like a ground cover layer, not a ground cover. Yes, a ground cover layer that sinks into the earth and then is filled with water. Okay, and then I make a riverbed for the lakes and rivers. In this, I made the mistake of making my rivers far deeper than my lakes, and it made kind of an awkward transition between the river and the lake. You don't really notice unless you're looking. That's another key thing if you're trying to go fast. I did the snow and the stone based on angle, the slope of the buildings. I got the custom trees from a JRCraft video, link somewhere. I was careful not to put the trees in the middle of that arch, because once again, that is where I am building my city. The way I decided the size of my city was I took that brush you're seeing and I expanded it to as big as possible, and I decided to make that the size of my city. And it turned out to be a pretty good sized city. It has well over 100 buildings, I think. Right now I'm creating a road terrain, so I can draw where I want my roads to be, and when I open up the map, they will be there. I do make the mistake of making my brush too wide, but speed is speed. You make mistakes. It didn't cause any major damage. This the structure of roads is not super important. You want to make sure that they're kind of small shapes so that you don't have big gaps where there's no houses in the middle of those blocks. Right here I'm making a path terrain again, not for inside the city but for around the city. I'm going to be building, I'm not actually going to be building, I'm going to be using World Painter to put in large farm expanses. around the city, and I'm using these path terrains that I made to kind of create some interesting patterns. Interesting roads cutting through the farmland. Because I used the lower version when I was creating this world, it kind of took a while to find all the blocks that I needed. In the newer version, it's easier to do this. I just set it to only place on grass so that it didn't fill in the roads or fill in where the paths were. And this, so I made the farm with the terrain tool, and then I made the grass, not the grass, the farm things, what are those called? The plants, using ground cover. You can see I accidentally made the roads have live coral in them instead of the dead coral. The dead coral kind of goes pretty well with the stone and the other gray colors. So it was a pretty easy fix. You just have to edit the layer. You don't have to do anything crazy. You can see there's a pretty hard line between the snow and the grass. I'm going to cover that up later with the castle that I want put into the side of the mountain. This is me. I'm setting up some command blocks between the mainland and that grass strip. That way I can travel back and forth and make structures. So this strip is going to be for where I actually build the houses before I put them in to the city. I'm going to be using the structure blocks to do that, and yeah. So for the actual like structure recipe, I guess I'll call it, I'm going pretty fast here, so I only want 3 different types of buildings, and so I'm going to do 3 different styles of foundations. I'm going to do 3 different styles of walls, and I'm going to do 3 different styles of roofs. You can intermingle the different styles and create like crossovers, which are pretty cool if you do them right. I'm not going to be focusing too much on that because, once again, the balance, I have chosen speed. I'm also going to be using these foundations in the wall that I'm going to be building. The trick to building this fast is to use your pieces, your different structures, your base structures, and put them together in different ways to create different things. Even though they're the same structure, if you arrange them differently with each other, they look different. Another trick is to use as much depth as possible. I think that makes structures look good. I don't want to tell you how to make your builds. I'm obviously not a humongous expert. I don't use a ton of commands. I only use the fill commands basically, and I have just recently learned how to use the clone commands. They're not really super important, in my opinion. Yeah. So I made 3 different foundations. One of them was a different height by making it a different height when I'm piecing together different houses. The roof heights will be different, and having layered roofs makes your house look way better. Once again, in my opinion. If you already have houses that you've pre-built in another world, even, you can put them into this world and input them into this city. They don't have, you just have to save them in your structure blocks. As you can see, I'm making my different wall styles, I'll call them. Wall as in like your house wall. In this particular city, I'm only going to be having like stripped spruce contrasted with oak as one wall, and then this one you can see that I'm making now spruce with the bark with white wool, and then here in a second I'm going to be doing bricks with stone bricks. Except I used the brick walls so that it made better depth. If you're using an older version of, or you can't use the brick walls inside of World Painter, so if you try to merge them onto World Painter, it'll just delete all the brick walls. Mostly. It's kind of a weird thing, it's kind of a glitchy thing. So, after you've started building your structures, don't import it back to World Painter and you'll have nothing to worry about. I did decide to make a fourth wall style, just for variety's sake. It didn't really come in handy, because it's just, it didn't work. It didn't, well, I mean, it did, but it didn't. Here I begin building a roof. I didn't really like this roof. It was kind of flat on the bottom, in my opinion. It's kind of hard to see from this perspective, but later you'll get a very clear view of what I mean. When you're building roofs, there's kind of two different styles you're going to want. You're going to want the roof that's going to go on the end of a building. If you have like a long building, you want a structure for the end of the roof, and then you want a structure for the roof in the middle of the building. And that's, at least with the way I've done it, my structures are 11 by 11 by like 6. And so that means in order to make them consistent, they have to overlap a little bit. Which also means that when I'm making roofs, the roofs need to account for that. Once you start building and doing this sort of thing, you'll very quickly realize what I mean. Another trick with roofs is that they have a lot of depth to them, so it's pretty easy to mess up. It's also pretty easy to find new designs. Just like I made 3 different wall styles, 3 different foundation styles, I'm going to make 3 different roof styles, not including the 2 like sub-style roofs of the end pieces and the body pieces. Again, if you already have structures made already, you don't really have to worry about doing all this. You can just go into your saves folder for the world, and then just move the files. I'll show you how to do that later, so don't worry about it. Working with brick walls is kind of tricky, especially with roofs, because when you start building those brick walls, they get ridges every time they bind to a block in a certain way, and so you sort of have to be careful with how you put it together. feel like it's taking a long time? Well, just imagine if you actually had to build it all. It would take even longer. So stop complaining. Okay, I'm probably going to cut that out. It's pretty important after you make all your structures to do a test of them. If you don't, you never know what weird stuff what weird like mistakes you've made. I definitely made a couple of mistakes, and they still fell through. That's kind of a consequence with going fast, and you really want to make sure that you get everything right on these early stage buildings, so that you don't copy your mistake over and over and over, and then realize it after you've built the whole city, and you'd have to go through and fix every single building. That's the trade-off with going fast like this. If you make a mistake on the early stages, it can show up in the later stages and make issues happen. Some of the mistakes I made was I didn't save the structure blocks properly, and I accidentally didn't put doors in most of my buildings, which was rather unfortunate. This structure you can see, this tower, is going to serve as the piece that I'm going to use to build my walls from one end of the mountains to the other. I'm going to start kind of inside the mountain and then just place on the outer edge of the last structure. When you're making these, you kind of want to make sure that you put the bottom of the structure at the lowest block on your surface, on your level that you're making it on. It helps to have the city kind of level. As you can see, there's very few ridges of elevation, and it makes it a lot easier to place buildings, because then you don't have to fill in with like stone or cobblestone underneath. As you can see, I don't use every path that comes out of the city. Some of them I just cover up. I did want a couple, so I left a gap. And if they don't line up perfectly, you can place your last wall structure inside of the previous one. And if you look closely at it, it's not too pretty looking, but if you're trying to go fast, these are the trade-offs you make. This is a diagonal gate I built. I actually really liked it. I don't think it's perfectly symmetrical. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's not perfectly symmetrical. But I do think it looked pretty good despite that. I used walls as those bars and polished blackstone blocks. I did a similar thing here over the river. I left it open so that I could make some interesting archways. If you're really trying to go fast, you would just like plow through this stuff. You wouldn't even care. I made the foolish mistake of trying to be detailed. But if you choose to be detailed, more power to you. This is kind of a thicker gate, so I can copy it to the other side. That way it kind of saves me some time, and I just have to put a hat over it so that it's not open on top. For the actual like gate part, I started out by using the blackstone again, and then I used nether brick fences so that the walls and the fence wouldn't connect. That way I could have like pretty close looking bars, but also have not have them get close to each other. Anyway, I used the short foundations as the hat, I guess you could say, and then put some slabs on top to finish it off. And now you can see me failing over and over to fly through it with my Elytra. I decided that I wanted a more of a round tower to go on top of the wall pieces that I've already made, at least on the gates that I've built, so that it kind of made it have a more powerful feeling. Making round pieces with structure blocks is kind of complicated, but it is doable, as you can see here. I do make some mistakes, though I catch them pretty quick. It's not too big of an issue. Then I just layer it on top of itself. Once again, I believe I made it 6 blocks tall. If you kind of make everything similar heights and similar sizes, you'll find that it's very convenient in the long run, even if it doesn't look super good while you're building it. I actually don't like these towers that I made because I feel like by the end of it they look like skulls wearing crowns. But, you know, maybe I'll just like pretend like I did that on purpose. And here you can see, just slap them on top. I think they look pretty good, despite them being skeletal-y. And I put them on each of the gates so that have some consistency going. If you had like a main gate, it might be slightly different, but you know, I did it trying to go fast. Right here, I begin building the statues. Originally, I wanted them like pillars holding up the wall, but then I decided to just kind of slap them to the fronts of the wall. And I'm going for a magical themed city here. I didn't do a super great job. I'm going fast. I don't have time to do a super great job on the theme. I think I did a pretty good job on the statues, considering this is one of the first statues I've ever actually made. It kind of started out looking like a maid carrying a dish, but by the end of it, I think it looked pretty good. It's supposed to be a wizard holding an end crystal with blue flames underneath. One thing that I learned, though, was that end crystals do not copy in the structure block type thing. I'm not sure why, but that's just how it turns out. That's just how it turns out. Luckily, I'm not going to place too many of these, so it'll be pretty easy to manually put in all the end crystals. Just be careful when you're working with them, because they explode if you punch them. If you use a clear command, they do disappear though. And I made a couple mistakes on the statues. I accidentally copied the grass that they were standing on, and so I had to go back and delete that. As you can see here though, I think they turned out pretty good. They only spawn on obsidian, or you can only place them on obsidian, but you can break the obsidian right afterwards and they still float there. Once again, speed gate. This probably turned out to be one of my favorite gates of the build. I kind of like gates, I guess. And I used a similar method to the previous gate, where I alternated nether brick fences and walls. And I chose nether brick because it's the only material that has both a fence version and a wall version. I guess I could have done iron bars, but it's not dark enough, in my opinion. Once again, using the structure blocks to make my life easier. And then I coat the top with a nice light, what do they use? Icing of the short foundation. Inside, I do end up actually doing some lighting. I think you'll see that right there. I had to switch out some cobblestone with the cobblestone walls that I used on the inside initially. And then I copy the whole thing, and I'm going to use it again when I build the cathedral and the castle. It's already pretty tall, so I don't have to worry too much about that ugly, hard snow line. But you do see later that I do raise it to be even taller to hide the snow line. Building the actual castle, though, was kind of tedious. It was kind of annoying. I couldn't just like slap it together like I did with the wall, and so I had kept all the walls on the same level. That way I could kind of make it look like it was supposed to be like consistent, because it was, and it is. If I was to do this again, I think I would do the snow line a little bit different, so it wouldn't need so much hiding, but it wasn't really a big problem. After you start getting in the groove, you get in the groove, and it all becomes pretty easy. I didn't plan the castle out too well, which is why it kind of didn't turn out super great. But I think it still looks cool anyway. The more you plan beforehand, the more speed you're going to be able to go with. Unless you overplan, and then you're going to be tripping over yourself. So it kind of, there's a balance there too. It's all trade-offs. Speed and detail. There is a later part in this video where I show how you can do a lot of this practically instantaneously, but it does not yield as good of a result, in my opinion. I use the gates on the top again, and that is so, well, I'm actually going to switch out the bars in the gate for glass panes, at least on that second level. Then on the bottom level, I'm going to be putting in like a door. I did a couple of experiments. I chose to do pink and purple because that's kind of the colors of the end crystal. It would have made more sense if I hadn't lined it with white and I'd lined it with blue instead, so that it would kind of match the colors of those statues. can see those are the doors there. I actually really liked the doors. They look pretty good from up close, in my personal opinion. This is why we test, so you don't have to come back and finagle with things like this. But once you do it, it does become an asset. And I did it because I wanted to try to put, house parts on top of the castle, but I decided that looked bad. In this part, I start building a special, building that I planned on from the beginning. It was supposed to become like a college of magic, but it ended up not quite there. It was still pretty nice, but eventually I just decided to do a cluster of similar looking buildings. That way I could kind of get some consistency going. And you just, suspend your disbelief. It'll be okay. Don't worry about it. Once again, you can see here, I'm kind of limited by the size of my structure blocks, what they're able to copy. So I have to build the other buildings in multiple steps instead of just pasting them all in at the same time. Here I decide to do a little bit of a different style building. Just for the sake of variety. I decided to add a really tall tower on it. If I had been taking more time, I probably would have put a big clock in it. But it is what it is. I think it looked kind of interesting in the end. Once again, I chose not to do the interiors though, because speed or detail. I'm choosing speed. There is some trouble with merging roofs going different directions and merging the walls that they fit in, especially if your structures have a lot of depth to them, because then it becomes a tricky battle between the roof and the other roof. And because one roof cuts off the other roof, which is kind of the benefit of the cloning command. If you know how to use it, you can negate that problem. I've never built or attempted to build a college campus before, because I'm from Hicktown, Oregon. I don't know what school is. I mean, because I hadn't really studied or done anything like that. This is why you kind of want to think beforehand on what you're going to do, so that you can come at it clearly and with higher quality. But I decided to put a fountain in, just because I'm cool like that. Not that you can really see it very well. This is the beginning of a cathedral. Basically, I just take the walls from the previous stuff and arrange them differently, like I was saying earlier. I was sort of going off like Notre Dame. I don't know how to pronounce it. The one with Quasimodo and the Hunchback. With big open stuff in the front and less in the back, I guess you could say. Although I did not put in big stained glass windows like I originally intended on. It was kind of tricky though to raise up the walls so that they kind of were at the same level as the top of the gate, and then have the different secondary level around the edges. I also decided to put in different doors instead of the prison bar gates, and I think they turned out pretty good. It was definitely interesting. Here I begin making the actual houses that are actually going to go like into the city build. I use a I make a porch and then I just sort of copy and paste it onto the other buildings. As you see though, it's a different wood style on the roof, so I switch it out for whatever style of the building I slap it onto. One mistake I made here was that I did not put in the doors correctly. And when I did, I forgot to save it correctly. Here I begin building the subforms of the homes. I start with kind of a medium-sized house of the stripped spruce and oak variety. And then I do a medium house. I do a medium house of all the styles that I've already made. And then I do a large house of all the styles. Once again, I had to switch out the wood so that it kind of fit together correctly. You find that if you have different shapes of like houses that you make, it makes filling in awkward angles very convenient. Probably my favorite house to make or to use is the brick house that I make next. And that's because it's really long, and so I can cover a large amount of space with it along the road, because depth doesn't necessarily matter, because you can't see the open gaps from the street unless you're flying over it, and then you can see open gaps. And you can actually do some interesting things with the open gaps. I just don't choose to do that. You'll kind of understand what I mean when I actually start building stuff in the city. You can see though, the brick house is a lot longer, or I guess wider from this perspective, than its counterparts, which means that it would stretch along the road better. It also means, though, it wouldn't really work very well on awkward angles, which is why variety is key. I do make some mistakes here as well, though. I leave some of that red wool laying around on accident, and I forget to put in the doors. The wind be blowing outside. Alright, and this is when I actually start the building process. As you can see, though, I did mess up and build a house into the wall, but that's the benefit of structure blocks. Even if it's an easy mistake, it is also an easy fix. It's kind of a lot of wiggle room, in my opinion. Especially if everything's the same size because you use the same blocks. In this particular instance, I only fill up half of the city because I want to show the other way you can fill up the city. I like to call it the Insta-City or the Click City. Click City! So right here, what you want to do is you want to pick, for the Insta-Cities, you want to pick a bunch, the houses that you want to have in it, and that's what I'm doing now. I'm getting some of the houses prepared, and then you're going to save them with a name, each a different name, a name that you can remember. For these, I just did like house 1, house 2, house 3, house 4, etc., etc. Mashed potatoes! This time I do go back and fix the doors. I think I forget to save it though, which is rather unfortunate. And this time for sure, you want to make sure that you have no mistakes. In this particular city, I'm going to use all the structures that I've already made. So all the medium, small houses, and the large houses. I could have gone into my other worlds and stolen some of the structures I made in there and then brought them over to this in the files. You don't really need to put them on this world's file. You can access them anywhere. You'll understand what I mean here in a second. Because what you do is you open up your files, you go to .minecraft, and then you find your world, you find like the saves or something. You find the names of the structures, and then you put them in the custom objects folder. Right here you can see I've merged the world. I made a copy beforehand, which is smart. You should do that. And in this particular instance, I used 50% intensity and drew in where I wanted the custom objects, which are the houses, all around what was left to fill in. As you can see though, the special walls, so the brick walls, did not load in this version. Here I am showing the way you can do it instantly. You don't even have to go into Minecraft to do this. I took the wall structure and then I drew it at a super high intensity and only set it to go on grass all along where I wanted it to go. And then I used the custom object houses only on grass again and filled in the whole thing. And as you can see, it actually worked really well. I'd switched out the brick walls for normal bricks. It did cross over the road sometimes, which was not super great, but it worked fairly well. Although I would prefer to do it normally, and so this is how you go back into your folder to recover a world. As you can see, guys, I have completed making this city, and I've added a couple of things, such as this bell. Oops. A blacksmith. A marketplace. As well as this giant statue. I wasn't too satisfied with how the computer-generated buildings turned out, and so I just decided to finish it up manually, but it is a proof of concept.